Moses supposes his toes are roses, but Moses supposes erroneously. For Moses he knows his toes ain't roses, that Moses supposes his toes to be.
I'm Elliott Gould, and you're listening to The Secret Life of Danny Kaye, here on BBC Radio 2.
Kissel will whistle at Busty Miss Russell, who rustle and bustle till Kissel will roar. So Russell asked Axel for Kissel's dismissal, and this'll teach Kissel to whistle no more.
By the early 60s, Danny could no longer shrug off the impact of television. He had persistently turned down offers for his own series, although giving in to the occasional TV special. But with movies tapering off, he finally bowed to the inevitable.
But with Danovich Kaye, nothing is possible. What is next?
There's an actor outside waiting to see you.
An actor? All right, show him in.
This way, please.
You are an actor? Go ahead. Act.
I am James the butler. I killed my master because he was cruel to me, so I killed him. I tell you. Well, Mr. Kaye, how do you like that?
I can tell you in one word.
Well?
That is not the word. Out, please, out.
The Danny Kaye Show had a team of writers whose job it was to come up with a multitude of sketches each week that encompassed Danny's unique talents. One of the writers was Paul Mazursky, who would later go on to direct such box office hits as Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice and Down and Out in Beverly Hills.
I could tell in the first week it was going to be tricky because there were 8 writers at least and fighting all the time. And once a week we would see Danny. Danny would be sitting there listening to the ideas. He would be sitting at the head of the table and listen to the ideas, and he would go, I don't know about that. And one of them he'd like, and he'd say, that sounds good. And one of our teams would go off to another room and start to write that sketch. And then when Thursday came, we'd have a run-through, and Danny would try the sketch out. But if it didn't work, we say the sketch committed suicide.
Shirley Jones guest starred a couple of times on the show.
It was one of the old-time variety shows, there were so many of those then, the Carol Burnett show and Perry Como show, and I mean, it was that. But Danny had something more in his show because he was an all-around performer, I mean, he could do all of that. Perry Como came out and sang. He came out and sang, but he also danced and did the acrobatic work and jumped all over the place and did all of the stuff that nobody else could do.
Danny could do certain things brilliantly. He could do Jerome, the funny Jerome. Remember, I don't know if you knew Jerome. Jerome was like the nerdy guy as a shoe salesman. He was very scared of everything. He could do Germans. Sieben Sie hatten Sie und fatten Sie.
Mit heilende Blume, der Ölsge Schmerzen, der Hassen, der Uldige Hölme, der Helme, der Flomen, der Geplang mit der Ölse und Hulme, der es knallt mit der Ölsengrone, Ölsenheißen, Gehöl,
The creativity just oozed from him, but in a fun way.
Another guest on the show was the singer Pat Boone.
I'd noticed one thing, that he wore what I call then earth shoes. They were shoes molded to his feet, rather clunky looking, but very comfortable and very supportive. And I thought maybe he had knee problems or ankle problems. And I noticed too that he sat a lot when he wasn't actually performing, even in rehearsal. So I asked him about it. He said, very sagely, he said, save your energy till when it counts. He said, I sit whenever I can. You should. I wear these shoes to save wear and tear on my legs so that I'll feel springy and good when the show time comes. And of course, his shows then were live. So you had that one crack at the public. And of course, he shone. He was just, it was a tremendous educational experience as well as a fun experience to work with him.
It was a tough grind making a weekly show. He'd rehearse all week and record on Thursday, then start all over again. In his spare time, he'd be back in the cockpit, jetting all over the world in search of potential acts for the show. A bright light was Louis Armstrong, who was a regular on the program.
When the saints go marching in, when the saints go marching in, I want to be in that number when the saints go marching in.
Satchmo epitomized everything Danny believed in. Here, like himself, was another man who had come from nowhere, with every disadvantage stacked against him, but who had made magic out of his career.
From the oldest to the latest, going to play in the band in the great grandstand when the saints go marching.
In spring 1967, after 4 years and countless awards, including a Peabody and 4 Emmys, the show finally bowed out, and Danny was free to pursue other areas of interest. But what would they be? He'd recently recorded a couple of children's albums, one of which has remained a family staple nearly 50 years later.
He did an album for kids, Mama, Give Me a Drink of Water. And it is, I think, the best children's album ever made. The songs, the magic in the performances.
Mommy, Mommy, give me a drink of water. I'm thirsty. I want a drink of water. No, now, not later, now.
It wasn't the water, it was the attention that he wanted. I mean, we played that, our children loved it. We keep it. We played it for our grandkids.
I love the song, the thank you note that he has to write.
Danny Kaye.
It starts out by saying, dear, whoever it was, Aunt Sally or something, thank you very much for the, and then there's a long pause, underwear. Thank you very much for the underwear. He just captures what a child really was like. Why in the hell would you give me underwear when really what I wanted was a bicycle, for heaven's sake? I always love underwear.
For Danny, movie roles were becoming fewer. The world of comedy had changed. A more sophisticated form of satire had taken over. That wasn't Danny's brand of humor. He was a sketch and gags guy. Melville Shavelson directed Danny in 2 of his last films, On the Double and The Five Pennies. Mel had his own thoughts as to why Danny's career tapered off.
Danny was a child. The guy he played was a child. And when he got to be 50 years old, he couldn't pretend to be a child anymore. And that disappeared, and when that disappeared, so did Danny.
Actress Shirley Jones.
I think he was a troubled man, there's no doubt about it. But listen, what comedian isn't troubled? I'm married to one, you understand? So they're all troubled in their own ways, some different ways. But yeah, he was a sad man, I think, in many ways.
Shirley Jones' husband, satirist Marty Ingalls.
It isn't hard to find the dark side of most people. It's really easy to find the dark side of comics, because that's where comic comes from. It comes from sadness, loneliness, of not being validated. That's what happens.
Writer and friend Glennis Roberts.
As light-hearted as he was on the screen, he was quite tragic off the screen. I think he was very insecure. He was very he questioned everything about life, and he could sit in the corner for hours with his head in his hands in the dark in a very despondent fashion. He was quite a handful as a friend, and I think he was quite lonely. I think he was very lonely. He wasn't really part of mainstream Hollywood society, although he went everywhere and he knew everybody and had them all to his dinner parties. But I think he was quite lonely inside. You can be lonely and have what you think are a coterie of friends and still be lonely, you know that.
Shirley MacLaine.
The loneliness was for himself. And I couldn't touch what that was. But he knew it was there. And he was exercising these talents, I think, as a road to that. Who am I? Who am I?
Maybe that's one of the reasons why Danny was always in motion. He was a whirlwind of energy. And when he was whizzing around the world, he didn't have to stop long enough to face his melancholy side. Those who knew Danny best describe him as the real-life Walter Mitty.
Oh, I think there's a little bit of Walter Mitty in everybody alive, men and women. If we didn't have dreams to retreat into, or fantasies that we could explore the rest of the world in, we probably wouldn't be able to make it at all. A little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down, as they say in the song. And I feel that I have an enormous advantage in that respect, because I can actually live out a lot of those dreams that many of us have.
But they weren't just fantasies Danny conjured up. Unlike his alter ego, he did more than just daydream. He actually put his dreams into motion. If Danny Kaye had not become an actor, he would undoubtedly have become Dr. Kaminsky.
I don't know where and when it occurred to me. I believe it's something I had to do. You know, I've always been of the opinion that if a man is given equal opportunity, he usually becomes what he has to become rather than what he wants to become. What I wanted to be was a doctor, and what evidently had to become was an entertainer.
Danny's friend, Dr. Avram Blooming.
Danny used to do open heart surgery with Michael DeBakey in Texas, where he would be scrubbed in, he would have his gloves on, and DeBakey, after doing the surgery, would say to Danny, "Do you want to close?" And Danny would sew up the patient's chest.
Close friend, American talk show host Michael Jackson.
Denton Cooley was a famous, world-renowned heart surgeon. They loved each other, and Denton would have him in regularly to watch and supposedly help with heart surgery. He didn't really help, but this great Texan surgeon liked this little guy from the Borscht Belt very much indeed.
Danny was a healer in the best possible sense. He'd come to my office, sit down at my desk, and just yell, "Next!" for somebody to come in, and the patients would love him. And he didn't do it in a showy way. He just did it as a human being.
It was in the kitchen of Ying's place that Danny really shone. Ying's place was the name of his restaurant. Actually, it was more his kitchen.
I like cooking because, in a strange way, cooking is like painting or writing. You express yourself. Oh, you may read books and may talk to people about the various things that go into making a particular dish.
He converted the patio of his Beverly Hills home into a Chinese kitchen, the center point being a massive circular table that seated 10.
I will bet that if you gave 5 people the same amount of food exactly, with the same amount of condiments, the same amount of ingredients, and they all followed the exact same recipe, that the 5 dishes would be, and not entirely, but they would have different qualities. They would have something of the person in them, just as if you were painted by 5 different portrait painters. Now, you are the same fella, but they would see you in 5 different ways.
My first wife, Barbara, and I were lucky enough to be invited a few times to eat in Danny's kitchen. And man, did he know how to cook. No wonder people wanted to live nearby. Here's his neighbor, Leslie Brickus.
Well, Sylvia, his wife, heard we moved in and invited us over to dinner to this magic little restaurant within their house. He was probably the world's best chef of Chinese food, and we became privileged to go there God knows how many times over the next several years. It was beyond belief, a 10-course dinner. He'd not eat with you. He had 3 Chinese ladies and 3 giant woks cooking this incredible meal. Diverse, varied, wonderful. I've never been in a Chinese restaurant that came close to it, so I no longer go to Chinese restaurants because I had Danny in my life and that was it. You can't come close to doing that anywhere else. Literally nowhere.